and welcome back to Mariana Mas Books. My name is Mariana and today I am here with the time and place tag. Okay, so this is a super fun tag which was created by Brittany at Literarily Smitten, and I was tagged to do it by Emma, I think it's her name, at the overstuffed shelf. I'm sorry, is Emma your name? I completely forgot. I always watch her channel, but she doesn't always say her name at the beginning of the videos, and the channel name is the overstuffed shelf, so she doesn't have her name on her channel name like I do, and so please forgive me if this is not your name, but anyway, I love her channel. You should go watch her as well as Brittany. She also has a really good channel. So the tag basically is a different kind of tag. You don't really have a specific prompts or questions. All you have to do is talk about 10 books that have specific time and place memories attached to them. I really loved this tag because, as you know, I am super intense and I have very strong memories about books. I don't just close the book and that's that. The book stays with me, and so I have many books that have very specific memories attached to them. Something I learned about myself is that the books that I have most attachment to, or no attachment, the books where I have the strongest memories, in the sense of like I really remember specific things about the reading experience, are not necessarily the most respectable reads. So there will be teenage vampires in this list. You have been warned. And several other not so respectable choices. So I hope you'll have fun. I'll certainly have fun sharing my 10 books. And without further ado, I'll just start with my books. I'm going to go on chronological order. The first book I want to talk to you about is Charlie and the Chocolate Factory by Roald Dahl. And this book I read when I was in 2nd grade. I remember this very specifically because that year I was living in Boston, Massachusetts, or rather Brookline, Massachusetts, but people who live there will say that Brookline and Boston are not the same thing, but for me they are. Brookline, it was kind of like a borough of Boston for me, but I know they are separate cities and probably have separate zip codes. I don't care. I lived in Boston, Massachusetts for 1 year with my family, or for 2 years. Once when I was in 2nd grade, and once when I was in high school in junior year. Both times we were there because my dad was doing a sabbatical year and he was doing a research stay, is that the word, at Boston College. We were there in 1997, 1998, and I was in 2nd grade. One of the things I remember the most was the school library, and that each classroom had a small little library, like a collection of books that each classroom had. And that's one of the things I remember most. So I remember reading a ton that year. And also another thing was, of course, the snow, which we don't have here. So I remember during the winter I had just bought Charlie and the Chocolate Factory by Roald Dahl, and it was a snow day, and so I read the entire book in one day, in one sitting. I remember very clearly being in the living room in our apartment where we lived and reading Charlie and the Chocolate Factory from beginning to end. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory is the book that I attribute my love of fantasy to. The reason why that is such a clear memory to me and that it stuck with my mind is because that's the first book that I ever read in one sitting, and it was a chunky chapter book. I was 7 years old or 8 years old at 7 or 8. So for me that was a super chunky chapter book, and I had never read a super chunky chapter book in one sitting, and it made me feel very adult. So that's the reason why I remember very, very clearly. The second book I want to talk to you about comes from that year of my life where I was in Brookline as well, in second grade, and it is The Big Wave by Pearl S. Buck. That one I read for school. I just remember that the book was about two boys who were friends and then get separated by a tsunami. And I remember being obsessed with that book when I read it. I remember that was the first book I would catalog as angsty. Again, I'm probably oversimplifying things, but I think these books kind of informed me as a reader. And this book was very sad. I literally don't remember anything about the plot other than the fact that they are super best friends that get separated by the tsunami. You know how I get with books I love, that I get super dramatic, and I remember that's the first book where I got those feelings of like, oh my god, super dramatic, and I remember loving it. So that's the second book that I want to talk to you guys about. The third one I want to talk to you about is a book I don't remember the name of. But I remember it very clearly. Like I remember a moment and a time and a place very clearly, and I remember the publisher of the book, and I have a vague memory of the cover, and I remember it was about a girl. That's the extent of what I remember. It was published by El Barco de Vapor, which is a children's publisher, a Spanish children's publisher, and they have different lines of books. So for the different age groups, they have like the blue line and the orange line and the red line. This book that I remember was from the red line. Okay, so this is where I have a kind of like a disconnect, because I remember very clearly the classroom I was in, and I think that might have been maybe when I was in 5th grade, I think, but the memory I have attached to it is with a teacher that was my teacher when I was in 6th grade. So I don't remember which memory to believe, the teacher or the classroom. But either way, I was in elementary school, in my school in Mexico, and I was reading the book in the reading time for the school, and I remember being super, super engrossed in the story. I have this very clear memory where I suddenly realized that that my classmates were kind of like trying to call my attention, and some of them were laughing. They were like, "Hey, Mariana!" And I remember realizing that the teacher had been calling my name for a while, but I was so engrossed in the story that I literally did not hear her calling me, and I didn't hear anyone trying to get my attention until everyone started being like, "Hey, Mariana," and so I took my eyes out of the book, and I have that. It's one of those very clear memories that you have from childhood. I can't find the book that it was, but it was by El Barco de Vapor, and that is a very strong time and place memory I have from a very specific reading experience. The fourth book I want to talk to you guys about, and of course this book had to make an appearance in this video, is The Lord of the Rings, specifically The Return of the King, and I am referring to the first time that I read the book. As you know, if you've seen my channel, I recently did a reread of the Lord of the Rings, and I became newly obsessed with the books. But the first time that I read them, I was finishing 6th grade, so I was around 12. When the school year was over, we went for a trip to Europe to visit some friends of my parents. So I was finishing The Lord of the Rings, so I took the Return of the King with me. And I remember very clearly where I was at their apartment. I remember the hallway very clearly. I remember the room I was in very clearly when I finished The Return of the King. And I remember the feeling that I had, that I was absolutely gutted by finishing the books, not only because of this feeling that you have when you finish a series of books, but because the ending for The Lord of the Rings is very bittersweet. And I remember being absolutely gutted and just I didn't know what to do with myself. And yeah, there I was in my parents' friend's apartment in Spain while we were on vacation, and I had just finished reading The Lord of the Rings, and I couldn't care less about anything going on in the real world because I had just finished The Lord of the Rings. The 5th book I want to talk to you guys about is The Truth About Forever by Sarah Dessen. So this book I read on our second stay in Massachusetts during my dad's second sabbatical year. So the first Boston books that I talked to you guys about were from when I was in 2nd grade. This one I was in my junior year in high school. And this one is making the list because this is the first ever romance that I read. I didn't know that romance as a genre existed. I just remember going to Barnes & Noble and buying the book because the cover, it appealed to me, the synopsis appealed to me, and I've always been very romantic. I've always loved love stories, so when I saw the synopsis I was like, okay, yeah, this sounds like a book for me. And I remember absolutely loving the book. I went back and read the synopsis, and it's a bit cringy, but at the moment I remember absolutely loving the book because I had never ever in my life read a romance before. This was, of course, a YA romance, and I couldn't believe that such a thing existed, that such a thing that was so perfect for me, that seemed to be written specifically for me, for the things that I liked. I couldn't believe that it existed. I am going to confess you guys something. I remembered it was a Sarah Dessen book, but I didn't remember exactly which Sarah Dessen book it was. So I went on Goodreads to do a bit of a search and see which one it was, and I saw 2 covers that felt familiar. Firstly, this one from The Truth About Forever, and the other one is from Just Listen, I think. So I went and read the synopsis for the books to see if something jogged my memory. And the thing that I remembered about the book was a scene where they are doing some sort of a catering job, and they are passing around meatballs on trays. And I remember very specifically because how can you have meatballs as like a canapé in a party? It didn't make sense to me. So I remember that very, very clearly. There were like funny characters that were part of the catering thing, and so when I read the synopsis, there is this part where it mentions catering, and I thought, okay, yeah, that's it, that's the book. And then it mentions about Wes, who was this bad boy, clearly the love interest from the book. And when I read the book, the name Wes, I was like, yes, Wes is the one I was in love with. So yeah, the next book I want to talk to you guys about is the Twilight trilogy. Please don't judge me too harshly. I was 17 And yes, I know, but Twilight, it was a very, very big part of my life, of my reading life, and just my life in general. It was, you know how I get my obsessions. Twilight was one of my OG obsessions from when I was in high school, and it needed to make the list. The first one I read again when we were in Boston. My sister bought it, and I remember being very intrigued by it, but I was scared because the cover looked creepy. Because I'm a scaredy cat, okay? I'm a scaredy cat, and I thought it looked creepy, and I was scared to read a book about vampires. But so my sister read it, and she was like, "You have to read it, and it's not scary at all." And so I read it, and of course, I was obsessed. We were reading that book when we were going to come back to Mexico, so our year abroad was coming to an end. And so she bought the first book. She read it in like 2 days, and I remember she was like, "I need to buy the second book now." And she bought it, and she was saving it. She was reading it very slowly because she wanted to save the book to read it on the plane back home. And me, because I have zero self-control, I took the first book and I just flew through it. And I remember my sister telling me, "You have to pace yourself because I am saving the second book for the plane back home, and I am not going to hurry up so you can read it, and I'm not going to let you read it before I do. So if you finish the first book and you want to continue on and you have to wait for me, then that's your problem. You know what you're doing. If you want to keep going, if you don't want to pace yourself, then go ahead, but you're not going to be able to read the second book until I am done with it." And again, me being me, zero self-control, I of course didn't pace myself. I finished the first book in like 2 days, and I had to wait until my sister finished it. And I remember being in the plane, watching her read the second book and being, "Are you almost done? Are you almost done? Are you almost done?" Because I wanted to read it already. So she did warn me, and I didn't control myself. I didn't pace myself. So that was my experience with the first book. So yeah, I do have very specific memories attached to these books. I'm not going to share all of them with you, like the fact that I went to the premiere for the movies or any of other things. It was a huge part of my life, but I was 17 years old, okay? So I think you can cut me some slack. And then, if you want, you can keep cutting me some slack, but I am losing credibility over here, because the next book that I want to talk to you guys about is The Host by Stephenie Meyer. And I was no longer 17 when I read it. I was in university, so not quite an adult, but still not 17. And that one I read in New York, actually. I went to New York after high school. Me and some friends, we went to New York, and we went to Barnes & Noble one of the first days, and I bought The Host by Stephenie Meyer, and so I started reading it while we were there, and I finished it in our trip. The last night of our stay in New York, I got really, really sick. We were staying at the apartment of one of my uncles who lived there in New York, so we were staying with him. My friends, they wanted to go to Times Square for the last time because it was our last night in New York, and I was feeling terrible. I got really, really sick. I got a really bad cold, so I didn't feel like going out. So I told them, go ahead and go out. I'll stay in. And of course, what did I do? But I finished The Host while I was feeling awful in bed reading The Host, and honestly, I loved it. I mean, I don't even remember exactly what it was about, but I remember I absolutely loved it, so there's that. The next book I want to talk to you guys about is a bit different, and it's called The 1000 Journals Project by some guy, and yes, that's how it is credited in the book. And this is kind of different. It's more of an art type project book by some guy who is a graphic designer. What he did was that he let loose 1000 journals throughout the US. So I think they were composition books, and at the beginning of the books they just had a page that said, you know, you could either write or draw or do whatever you wanted in the journals, and then after you were done to leave it anywhere you wanted in public. And so whenever someone found it, they would contribute with their art or their words to the journal. And then in the instructions it said, when you're the last person, if you're the person who fills up the notebook, please send the finished book to this address. And so he started receiving all of the journals with all of the artwork from all of the people that had found the journals in the wild, and he started receiving them. And so he edited a book with some of the pages from the journals, from the artwork or the words that people wrote in those journals. I bought that book when I think in the MoMA gift shop in one of my trips to New York, and I brought it back and I really loved it. But the memory I have really attached to it is because when I was in university, my boyfriend at the time, he was obsessed with that book. And it was, I think, around 2012. There was a big student movement here in Mexico, and we were part of that movement. And so we decided to start our own journals project, and so we created our blank journals, and we put together a collective of like designers, and we would take the journals to protests or to events or to any type of festivals, any type of public gathering like that, and we would encourage people to put in their thoughts, or whether in words or in art form, about the political situation in Mexico. And so it was more of like a political project. And again, we gathered the different artwork, and we did different exhibitions with the journals, and we did a website where we shared the artwork and everything that came from those journals. And so that's why I have very specific memories from the 1000 Journals Project book. And then finally, just two more, I promise, just two more. Then the other one is My Stroke of Insight by Dr. Julie Bolte-Taylor. Dr. Jill Bolte-Taylor. And this one I've talked about before, so I'm not going to go in depth, but this one was the first self-help book I read. This was after the first brain surgery that I had after my diagnosis. The memory attached to this one is more of when I found the book in a bookstore in Mexico City. We were browsing through the new releases sections, and I found that book, and I remember being very it was the first time where I had felt drawn to a book of the sort. I had never read any self-help book or any that type of book, and I was myself going through a personal recovery journey, and so I remember feeling it was kind of like fate finding that book in the new releases section in the bookstore. And so I bought it and I read it and I felt seen, and it was a very important experience for me, and one that I think really marked the beginning of a new period in my life, both personally and professionally. And finally, the final book I'm going to talk about is The Kiss Quotient by Helen Huang. And this one I'm going to talk about because this is the first adult romance that I read. So this is the first romance book like with sex that I had ever read. And again, after I stopped reading YA, I didn't know that romance was a thing in adult literature. If you go to bookstores here in Mexico, I don't think you will ever find any romance novels the way you can find in bookstores in the US, so I didn't know it existed. I discovered that adult romance was a thing through blogs from the US before BookTube, and or before I discovered BookTube. And I remember seeing The Kiss Quotient recommended. I really liked the blogger that recommended the book. I trusted her opinion, so I got it. And again, cartoony cover, so it was very approachable. And I started reading it. First chapter, and I came across a conversation where they start talking about condoms. And I remember being, and see, this is why I want to do that beginner romance video, because if you have never read romance, you maybe are not used to the very mundane, unliterary conversations that happen in romance books. And I wanted to mention it because me, a romance reader, you know me, you know how much I love romance. The first romance book that I picked up as an adult, I came across that conversation. I was like, what the actual bleep is going on? Why are they talking about condoms? Why do I want to read about people talk about condoms? I honestly don't want to read about people talking about condoms. Like, no. And so I closed the book and I shoved it in the back of my bookshelf and I said, no. No, I'm not reading that. And I guess it was like a year hidden in my bookshelf until I started craving like a romantic story, and I was like, I want to read a romantic story. I remember that book and I thought, okay, I'm going to pick it back up and get past that section and see how it is. And so I went to it knowing what to expect and with my mind more open, and I ended up reading it in 2 days and absolutely loving it. And it was my gateway, I guess, into adult romance. And I just, that's the beginning of the story, and nothing more needs to be said because you know how I feel about romance now. But yeah, so that's what I wanted to talk about with the time and place tag. Again, thank you so much for the tag. If you want to do it, go ahead and do it. Again, I'm not going to tag anyone, but that will be it for the moment, and I will see you in another bookish video soon. In the meantime, I wish you happy reading.